now we reach section 10, the quote unquote apostles of infinite love, anti-popes. So, the quote unquote apostles of infinite love. The next schismatic and heretical sect we will look at is the so-called apostles of infinite love. A French priest named Michael Collin claimed to have a vision on April 28, 1935, where Christ consecrated him a bishop and gave him a higher status than a normal bishop, in that one day he would become the Pope. Does this sound familiar? It's actually kind of similar to the Dominguez Gomez guy from the Palmyrian stuff, right? Let's continue now. So, continue reading here. According to him, on that same day, Christ also instructed him to found, quote, the Order of the Apostles of Infinite Love. On October 7th, 1950, Collin claimed to have another vision where God the Father put a papal tiara on his head. On January 17th, 1951, he was reduced to lay status by order of Pope Pius XII. The decree against him can be found in the 1951 publishing of the Acta Apostolicae Sedis, okay? And I actually had this translated from Latin because I think the only way I could find it was in Latin. I could only find it in Latin. So I actually hired a translator to translate this into English, okay? So Michael Collin, condemned by the Holy Office, 1951 AD. And I'm going to read the English version, of course. It's and the Latin's right there if you want to read the Latin. The English version, the translation says, Acts of the Supreme Sacred Congregations. The Supreme Sacred Congregation of the Holy Office. Notification. The Supreme Sacred Congregation of the Holy Office, by the decree dated Wednesday, January 17th, 1951, has returned the priest Michael Collin, who had been dismissed from the Congregation of Priests of the Sacred Heart of Jesus and had roamed through several dioceses to the lay state. He had frequently and in various ways violated the prescribed sacred canons. The same Supreme Sacred Congregation dissolved and prohibited the association entitled, quote, Institute of the Apostles of Infinite Love, Opera degli Apostoli dell'Amore Infinito. Okay, that's the Latin of the English name, right? Which the aforementioned priest had presumed to establish without the approval of the competent ecclesiastical authority, given in Rome from the offices of the Holy Office on the 30th day of May, 1951. Marinus Marani, notary. Okay? So, yeah. It's interesting. I wonder, let me see, because in the Latin version it says, Institut des Apotres de Amor Infini, Opera degli Apostoli del Amore Infinito. So I guess, I don't know what the second part of that name is saying. Opera degli and so on. I don't know why the translator didn't translate that part, but you get the point. Basically, he was reduced to lay status, and the association that he, formed was dissolved by the Holy Office. Okay, so yeah. So this condemnation was reiterated in 1956 AD. I wasn't able to find the original Latin, but an English translation reads as follows. Intervention by the Holy See through the Sacred Congregation of the Holy Office. Statement released in L'Osservatore Romano of December 16, 1956. An ex-member of the Congregation of the Priests of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, Reverend Michael Collin, who has himself called Father Michael of the Infinite Love, was reduced to lay status by a decree of this Holy Office dated January 17th, 1951. And it says Acta Apostolicae Sedis, 1951, page 447. The same decree dissolved the association called, quote, Institute of the Apostles of Infinite Love, which said priests which said priest had pretended to found without the competent ecclesiastical approbation. Whereas Reverend Colin, imposing upon the good faith of some ecclesiastics and religious institutes of women, dared celebrate Holy Mass after being reduced to lay status. This supreme congregation wills to warn the bishops, the clergy, both secular and regular, and all persons committed with the management of churches or chapels, that the said priest is still a layman with all the juridical effects ensuing. We also hereby recall the bishops that Colin is forbidden to reconstitute and under any name that may be the association that was dissolved by the decree from this holy office as mentioned above, and he is forbidden to found new associations. That is the reason why the Institute of the Apostles of Infinite Love and that of the Magnificat, also founded by him in spite of the formal prohibition by the Holy Office, are both not recognized by the Church, and the faithful are forbidden to belong to it. Given in Rome at the Palace of the Holy Office on December 15th, 1956, signature Arturo de Jorio or Jorio, notary. I don't know if it's Jorio or Jorio, but yes. So this guy was literally forbidden by the Holy Office, right? He's forbidden by the Holy Office to found any associations, organizations, and so on. Okay, I mean that right there shows you it is a schismatic sect. Okay, no Catholic is permitted to belong to that schismatic sect because he literally was forbidden by the Church to found any groups. Okay, so Catholics are forbidden to belong to the illicit and schismatic and heretical society called, quote, the Apostles of Infinite Love. Okay, I mean that alone. Like this entire section could just be that, and that proves it's a false sect to begin with. But for the sake of being exhaustive and thorough, we will delve more, thoroughly into this and condemn them in much more detail. So, Anti-Pope Clement XV's delusion. The delusional Colin, nonetheless, basically believed that he was like a quote-unquote co-pope alongside Pius XII, and believed that Pius XII actually supported him, but was not able to properly act since modernists had infiltrated the Vatican. After the death of Pius XII, he believed the same about Antipope John XXIII, but when John XXIII died in 1963, he declared himself to be now the one and only quote-unquote true Pope, Clement XV. He denounced Paul VI as an anti-pope, and he then quote moved the Holy See to France and continued his community activities there. Activities which were abominable and sacrilegious, as you will soon see. Antipope Gregory XVII. There was another false visionary in Canada named John Gaston Tremblay, who claimed to have a vision of a future pope. When he met Colin, he was unsure if it was him, but after consulting another false mystic, he was certain that Colin was the so-called pope he saw in his vision. Tremblay also had a religious group, and they merged with Colin's group. However, at some point, Colin and Tremblay had disagreements. In 1967, Colin declared that he had been inspired divinely to not have Tremblay be his successor. In 1968, Tremblay asserted that he had been divinely elevated as, quote, Pope Gregory XVII, thereby replacing Anti-Pope Clement. So even the schismatics having schisms among themselves, right? Colin partially recognized this, but nonetheless, he designated another successor. However, in 1969, he acknowledged that Anti-Pope Gregory XVII was now the so-called Pope. Anti-Pope Gregory XVIII. Colin died in 1974, and his community in France broke apart into many splinter groups. From what I have seen, none of these groups have remained affiliated with the Canadian group. Tremblay died in 2011, and Antipope Gregory the 18th, the current Antipope, was elected in 2012. Now let's look at the heresy, sacrilege, false prophecies, etc. of the so-called apostles of infinite love. Brief backstory. My sources for information on this group have been both primary and secondary. I have personally spoken to one of their disciples, and some of the things I will share with you are what he told me of their beliefs and practices. And God willing, I hope, if the Lord wills, that he is actually watching this video right now, because it'd be actually very good for him to see this condemnation of them. Other things I have seen online, okay? So some of these things I obtained knowledge of them through speaking to this disciple of theirs, and other things I obtained through like online sources, okay? If something I am telling you was confirmed or told to me by this disciple of theirs, I will be sure to mention that. I have also sent an email to one of their priests weeks ago at this point, but he has not yet responded to answer my very simple question, whether he believes someone can die as a non-Catholic and be saved. You'll see why I asked him that soon. And of course, this was written in 2023, and now we are 2 years later, almost in 2025, and that so-called priest has still not responded, okay? So that should tell you something. We're gonna get into all those details though. Ordaining of women. The first problem with this group is that they, so-called ordain women. I not only saw this in my online research, but was personally told this by their disciple who I spoke to. The disciple said that these ordained women don't say mass, but they just, quote, consecrate the Eucharist, and they only do this at all female gatherings. This is from a website. Yes, so a quote here from the website. From the 1960s onwards, the Apostles of Infinite Love has ordained women to the priesthood. The renewed church under Clement XV also consecrated women bishops, but the Canadian apostles have not. Michael Cuneo, 1997, claimed that by the mid-1990s, about a third of the nuns at St. Jovite was ordained. Today, most of the nuns are. Still, there are differences between male and female priests. Women only say mass privately or sometimes in groups of women. Only under exceptional circumstances, when no male priest is present at a mission, women can say mass in public. Okay, so only under exceptional circumstances, when no male priest is present at a mission, women can say mass in public. However, most of the male priests rarely say mass in public. Some of the ordained nuns can also take confession and act as spiritual advisors. Personal Observations, 2019. Magnus Lundberg, Apostle of Infinite Love. That's the source there. Continuing, quoting from this website. Claiming to defend the traditional Roman Catholic teachings, it is surprising that the renewed church, quote, Apostles of Infinite Love in France, ordained women as priests, and that the obligatory clerical celibate was abolished. From Magnus Lundberg, Modern Alternative Popes 2, Apostles of Infinite Love, France. Another quote, Tremblay traveled to France to be ordained a priest and consecrated a bishop by Colin. Later, he was made a cardinal, and the Pope ceded the title of superior of the order to him. In the following years, an increasing group of people joined the Canadian branch, and Tremblay ordained a number of men and women to the priesthood. Modern Alternative Popes 3, Apostles of Infinite Love, Canada. Another quote, just as the renewed church in Europe, the Canadian church ordains women to the priesthood, though there are differences between male and female priests. Women only say mass at all female religious services, and unlike males, they have to kneel when saying the mass. Moreover, only older and experienced nuns are ordained priests, while young men, just having entered the community, can become priests. Modern Alternative Popes 3, Apostles of Infinite Love, Canada. Quote unquote, ordaining women is a sacrilege. The Catholic Church has always, and will always, forbid the ordaining of women. The ordination of women is not only forbidden by ecclesiastical discipline, but by the divine law itself, and therefore a woman cannot possibly validly receive holy orders under any circumstances whatsoever. This is from the Catholic Encyclopedia on Sacrilege. Real sacrilege is the irreverent treatment of sacred things, as distinguished from places and persons. This can happen, first of all, by the administration or reception of the sacraments, or in the case of the Holy Eucharist by celebration, in the state of mortal sin, as also by advertently doing any of those things invalidly. Okay? Here are some relevant quotes from the Handbook of Moral Theology by Father Dominic Prummer, Imprimatur 1955 AD. Quoting from that book now, real sacrilege is the use of something sacred for an unworthy purpose. The abuse of the sacraments is the chief form of real sacrilege, such as the invalid reception of the sacraments, the commission of grave irreverence towards the Blessed Eucharist, etc. Continue from Father Prummer here. God created woman as man's helper and formed her from Adam's rib. Furthermore, he has excluded her from the priesthood. All this would seem to indicate clearly that it was never God's intention for complete equality to exist between man and woman. Therefore, the radical emancipation of women and their complete equality with men seem to be alien to the Creator's intention. Another quote, to administer the sacraments to those incapable of receiving them would be a grave act of sacrilege, you see, directly procured by the minister himself. Thus, for instance, a bishop could never confer orders on a woman, even to escape death. Okay, so attempting to ordain a woman as a priest is sacrilege. The so-called apostles of infinite love is a sacrilegious sect. Ordaining women is also forbidden by the Church's canon law. This is Canon 968, Section 1. Only a baptized male validly receives sacred ordination. For laicity, however, he should be outstanding in the qualities according to the norm of the sacred canons, in the judgment of the proper ordinary, and not detained by any irregularity or other impediment. Another important point is that since a woman cannot possibly become a priest, all those who receive, quote, the Eucharist, which was so-called consecrated by so-called ordained women, receive nothing but bread. This is, let's see, from Handbook of Moral Theology, Father Dominic Prummer, 1955 AD, quoting the Fourth Council of the Lateran. Priests alone have the power of consecrating the Eucharist validly. Okay, so any so-called woman, any so-called priest that's a woman claiming to consecrate the Eucharist and give that to people, those people are receiving bread. Okay, just plain natural bread. They're not receiving the Eucharist because those women cannot consecrate the Eucharist. Finally, the Church has always regarded altar girls or women serving at the altar to be an abomination. If this is an abomination, how much more of an atrocity is it to dare to quote unquote ordain a woman? Okay? If a woman can't even serve at the altar, how much more abominable is it to claim to make her a priest? Okay? This is from Handbook of Moral Theology, Father Dominic Prummer, 1955 AD. A priest may not celebrate Mass without someone to serve him and make the answers. A female server may be used only if no male person is available and there exists a just cause. In no case may the woman serve at the altar, but she must answer the prayers at a distance. Therefore, a priest is allowed to celebrate Mass for devotion with a woman as server if there is no man present capable of serving. It would be a grave sin for a woman to serve immediately at the altar, for example, by offering the cruets to the priest. Okay? and it's from St. Alphonsus, Moral Theology, Book 6. This is Pope Benedict XIV, Alate Sunt, 1755 AD. Pope Gelasius, in his 9th letter, chapter 26, to the bishops of Lucania or Lucania, I'm not sure. Let's say Lucania for now. Lucania condemned the evil practice which had been introduced of women serving the priest at the celebration of Mass. Since this abuse had spread to the Greeks, Innocent IV strictly forbade it in his letter to the Bishop of Tusculum. Women should not dare to serve at the altar. They should be altogether refused this ministry. We too have forbidden this practice in the same words in our oft-repeated constitution, Etsi Pastoralis, section 6, number 21. Okay? Women are forbidden to serve at the altar. Let's move on to another sacrilege of the so-called Apostles of Infinite Love, the sacrilege of repeating confirmation. The next sacrilege we will look at is this group's practice of repeating confirmation. The Church teaches that baptism, confirmation, and holy orders place an indelible mark on the soul, which means they cannot be repeated in the same person. If one attempts to repeat these sacraments in the same person, it is invalid and a sacrilege. This is Magnus Lundberg, Modern Alternative Popes II, Apostles of Infinite Love, France. The renewed church held that there are 7 sacraments, but their understanding of them differed much from the Roman Catholic teachings. The sacrament of confirmation could be repeated various times as a way to get strength from the Holy Spirit. Let's see what the Catholic Church teaches about this. This is from Handbook of Moral Theology, Father Dominic Prummer, 1955 AD. By reason of their effect, sacraments are divided into those which imprint a character, baptism, confirmation, orders, and those which do not. The former cannot be repeated, whereas the latter may be. This is the Council of Florence, 1439 AD. Three of the sacraments, namely baptism, confirmation, and orders, imprint indelibly on the soul a character, that is, a kind of stamp, which distinguishes it from the rest. Hence, they are not repeated in the same person. The other 4, however, do not imprint a character and can be repeated. Council of Trent, Session 7, 1547 AD. Canon 9. If anyone saith that in the 3 sacraments, to wit, baptism, confirmation, and order, there is not imprinted in the soul a character, that is, a certain spiritual and indelible sign, on account of which they cannot be repeated, let him be anathema. All who hold that these sacraments can be repeated are anathematized and condemned by the Church. Okay? The so-called Apostles of Infinite Love are anathematized. Let's move on to their disrespect for confession. The next sacrament, which these heretics disrespect, is that of confession. From Magnus Lundberg, Apostle of Infinite Love, quote, only under exceptional circumstances, when no male priest is present at a mission, women can say Mass in public. However, most of the male priests rarely say Mass in public. Some of the ordained nuns can also take confession and act as spiritual advisors. Personal Observations, 2019. Of course, as we mentioned before, since a woman cannot be a priest at all, she cannot confer confession. She cannot, participate in confession as the minister, as the priest, okay? Obviously, since a woman cannot be a priest, she cannot hear confession or absolve anyone of sins. This is sacrilege. Magnus Lundberg, Modern Alternative Popes II, Apostles of Infinite Love, France. The renewed church held that there are 7 sacraments, but their understanding of them differed much from the Roman Catholic teachings. The Pope abolished auricular confession. Sins were confessed directly to God, and the individual decided his or her penance. This is just Protestantism. This all is literally just Protestantism, right? Just Protestantism. That's what Protestants believe. Oh, you just confess to God and you'll deal with that between you and God. You don't need to go to a priest or anything. That is just Protestant heresy right there. And auricular, for those who don't know, auricular means like related to the ear or hearing, right? So it means like confession where you like speak to a priest. You know, the priest hears your confession. That's what auricular is referring to. I had to Google that. I'm pretty sure I never heard that word in my life until that point. Anyways, continuing. This idea of not needing to confess to a priest, but only to God alone, is a filthy heresy which was popularized by Protestantism. Okay? It denies the necessity of the sacrament of penance, and anyone who believes that filth is anathematized and condemned by the church. Also, the sacraments were instituted by Christ himself, so not even the Pope has the authority to abolish any of them. If one is unable to access the sacrament of penance, one should seek to perform an act of perfect contrition. This is the Council of Trent, session 14, 1551 AD. Canon 6. If anyone denieth either that sacramental confession was instituted, or is necessary to salvation of divine right, or saith that the manner of confessing secretly to a priest alone, which the church hath ever observed from the beginning, and doth observe, is alien from the institution and command of Christ, and is a human invention, let him be anathema. Okay? Obviously, the heretic Michael Collins' so-called abolition of confession, thereby denying its necessity for salvation, and perhaps even the fact that it was instituted by Christ, is an act of heresy, and he is anathema as well as all who hold his filthy heresy. Now we move on to the heresy of indifferentism, basically the heresy that we condemn the most on this channel, right? And I think of all the heresies, this one just disgusts me probably the most of all, to be honest, personally speaking. Of all the heresy that's currently running around the world right now, this one, I think, disgusts me the most of all of them. So, next. The disciple of theirs, who I spoke to, told me that they teach that one does not need to become Catholic to be saved. Okay? This is why I asked the so-called priest about this in my email, but he has not responded. Of course, as I mentioned, that was in 2023, and he still hasn't responded. Okay? So, yeah. And I asked him in the email, very simply, whether he basically believes someone can be saved without the Catholic faith, and he did not respond, which I assume is an indicator that he is a heretic and didn't want to engage in the conversation. You understand? Because the disciple of theirs told me that they believe that filthy garbage. Continuing. Anyways, the church teaches that outside of her, there is no salvation. Someone can only be saved if they die in the state of sanctifying grace, something which is impossible without supernatural faith, and you cannot have supernatural faith if you don't believe in the Catholic Church. Therefore, all who die as Protestants go straight to hell forever. All who die as pagans go straight to hell forever. All who die as Eastern so-called Orthodox go straight to hell forever. All who die as Muslims go straight to hell forever. All who die as Jews go straight to hell forever. All who die as atheists go straight to hell forever. All who die as agnostics go straight to hell forever. You get the point. All of them, as Pope Eugene IV said, every single one of them, period, case closed, no exceptions at all. All of them go straight to hell forever if they die without the Catholic faith. Case closed forever. To have supernatural faith, it is necessary to believe in the Catholic Church. It is also necessary to either be baptized or to desire baptism. This desire for baptism can be explicit or implicit. It is explicit when someone is aware of the necessity of baptism and desires the sacrament. It is implicit if they are invincibly ignorant of the necessity of baptism, but desire to do all that God wills for them to do to save their soul. Please view episode 1 or the other videos on the channel for more details about supernatural faith, invincible ignorance, baptism of desire, etc. False prophecies. The last thing we'll be looking at is something almost unanimous among today's heretics, which is false prophecies. Okay? Anti-Pope Clement XV prophesied that there will be worldwide nuclear destruction in 1965. When this false prophecy failed to happen, Colin then changed his doomsday date to 1969. He said, and we're going into now aliens, okay, so-called aliens. He said that the destruction, which was supposed to happen in 1965, was averted by aliens called the planetarians. Let's read the quote here from Magnus Lundberg, Modern Alternative Popes 2, Apostles of Infinite Love, France. Towards the end of his life, Pope Clement's teachings became even more original and included frequent references to extraterrestrials and UFOs. He predicted an imminent nuclear war which would destroy the entire world. At first, he stated that the war would come in 1965. Later, the date was moved forward to 1969. The explanation for the postponement was that the global war was hindered by quote-unquote planetarians, inhabitants of other planets. Clement XV claimed that 5,000 of them? Yeah, 5,000 of them lived on Earth. They appeared in human guise, but the Pope could see their true reality. So these aliens, according to him, were, they live on Earth, 5,000 of them. They could be your neighbor, they could be your mailman, they could be the president of America, who knows? But he could tell if they were an alien, okay? This is just ridiculous nonsense. Now, Catholics are not forbidden to believe in the existence of strange, corporeal, sentient people or beings, okay? For example, St. Jerome in his work called The Life of Paulus the First Hermit shares a story wherein St. Anthony of Egypt saw a centaur and even had a pious conversation with a satyr. I'm going to read a bit from that now, quoting, The blessed Paul had already lived on earth the life of heaven for 113 years, and Antony, at the age of 90, was dwelling in another place of solitude, as he himself was wont to declare, when the thought occurred to the latter that no monk more perfect than himself had settled in the desert. However, in the stillness of the night, it was revealed to him that there was farther in the desert a much better man than he, and that he ought to go and visit him. So then at break of day, the venerable old man, supporting and guiding his weak limbs with a staff, started to go. But what direction to choose, he knew not. Scorching noontide came, with a broiling sun overhead, but still he did not allow himself to be turned from the journey he had begun. Said he, I believe in my God. Sometime or other, he will show me the fellow servant whom he promised me. He said no more. All at once he beholds a creature of mingled shape, half horse, half man, called by the poets Hippocentaur. At the sight of this, he arms himself by making on his forehead the sign of salvation, and then exclaims, Holoah! I don't know, Holoah. I guess that could be some like ancient way of saying like, hello? I don't know. Holoah, where in these parts is a servant of God living? The monster, after gnashing out some kind of outlandish utterance in words broken rather than spoken through his bristling lips, at length finds a friendly mode of communication, and extending his right hand, points out the way desired. Then with swift flight, he crosses the spreading plain and vanishes from the sight of his wandering companion. But whether the devil took this shape to terrify him, or whether it be that the desert, which is known to abound in monstrous animals, engenders that kind of creature also, we cannot decide. So he's saying, like, basically, whether that was an actual natural, earthly creature, or the devil taking on that form, he's not certain. Antony was amazed, and thinking over what he had seen, went on his way. Before long, in a small rocky valley, shut in on all sides, he sees a mannequin with hooked snout, horned forehead, and extremities like goat's feet. When he saw this, Antony, like a good soldier, seized the shield of faith and the helmet of hope. The creature nonetheless began to offer to him the fruit of the palm trees to support him on his journey, and, as it were, pledges of peace. Antony, perceiving this, stopped and asked who he was. The answer he received from him was this: I am a mortal being, and one of those inhabitants of the desert whom the Gentiles, deluded by various forms of error, worship under the names of fauns, satyrs, and incubi. I am sent to represent my tribe. We pray you in our behalf to entreat the favor of your Lord and ours, who, we have learned, came once to save the world, and whose sound has gone forth into all the earth. As he uttered such words as these, the aged traveler's cheeks streamed with tears, the marks of his deep feeling which he shed in the fullness of his joy. He rejoiced over the glory of Christ and the destruction of Satan, and marveling all the while that he could understand the satyr's language, and striking the ground with his staff, he said, Woe to you, Alexandria, who instead of God worships monsters. Woe to you, harlot city, into which have flowed together the demons of the whole world. What will you say now? Beasts speak of Christ, and you instead of God worship monsters. He had not finished speaking when, as if on wings, the wild creature fled away. Let no one scruple to believe this incident. Its truth is supported by what took place when Constantine was on the throne, a matter of which the whole world was witness. For a man of that kind was brought alive to Alexandria and shown as a wonderful sight to the people. Afterwards, his lifeless body, to prevent its decay through the summer heat, was preserved in salt and brought to Antioch that the emperor might see it. All right, let's see. That's the end quote there. Okay. Now, the question of the lawfulness of believing in strange, corporeal, sentient people, to the best of my knowledge, depends on whether you believe that those people are true men who are not descended from Adam. To believe such a thing would be heresy, as I will soon show. However, if you believe that such beings are not true men and not descended from Adam, then it may be a lawful belief to hold. Before I explain this more, I want to point out that there are human beings who suffer from extreme physical abnormalities, which we today recognize as diseases, but perhaps in ancient times would have caused them to be seen as monsters or non-human creatures by normal humans. For example, there are people who have a disease called hypertrichosis, which makes them look like hairy humanoid animals. Maybe in the Egyptian desert at one point, there was a tribe of people who looked similar to this, or had other deformities which made them look like non-human creatures, right? Because if you saw that, if you were in the woods and you saw someone who looks like that, say just their head looking at you through the bush, you would think that's like a gorilla or a prime or some kind of ape or something, like you wouldn't assume that's a human being. You understand? So, but these are people. So let's continue here. Maybe in the Egyptian desert at one point, there was a tribe of people who looked similar to this or had other deformities which made them look like non-human creatures. there are some deformities which can cause people to grow horns out of their head as well. So maybe St. Anthony saw a person like that in the desert, right? That's possible. Either way, let's now look at the lawful limitations of what Catholics can believe regarding strange creatures or people. In Humani Generis on human origin, Pope Pius XII discusses things like evolution and Pelagianism. Here is an excerpt from it. Quote, when, however, there is question of another conjectural opinion, namely Pelagianism, the children of the church by no means enjoy such liberty. Because Pelagianism is the belief that the human race has multiple origins and not just one origin through Adam and Eve. Okay? That's what Pelagianism is. And I would argue that neo-Pelagianism, in my view, is like what Nazis hold to. Or even, honestly, dude, like, I feel as though the modern understanding of so-called race is dangerously close to Pelagianism. Let me charge my computer, hold on. Because, of course, as far as modern, like, let's say, atheist, agnostic, godless people, as far as what they believe about race and so-called evolution, all this stuff, they usually claim, in my experience of them, of seeing what they say, they usually claim that all humanity has a common origin from like some ape creature or whatever. But then at the same time, they have these strange, hard delineations between so-called races where they've basically lost the understanding of the fact that we are all just Adam and Eve's grandchildren. And they see like, oh, these are black people and these are white people and these are Asian people. And they make these rigid barriers between people, which are really artificial. This is completely artificial, because if you have someone who has, 3 quote unquote black ancestors, recent black ancestors, and 4 recent, so-called white ancestors, well, they're not black or white, are they? So where do they fall? Right? It's artificial. You can't create these hard dividing lines because they don't exist. We're all just Adam and Eve's grandchildren, right? That's all we are. We just look different, right? It's kind of like families, even the Bible talks about the different families, okay? That's why we have people who look different and have like common features, because in that part of the world or whatever, that was basically a large family that grew into a nation, you know what I mean? That kind of thing. So that's why the, Nigerian people will look a certain way generally. Asian people the Chinese people look a certain way generally, because those are basically family groups that spread out across the world. And if you have a family group of people and they intermarry among themselves for generations, over time, they will have common features because they all share a similar genetic, a similar gene pool. You understand? Like, say, for example, you were to take, let's say, 20 so-called black people and 20 so-called Asian people and put them on an island, right? And they live on that island for 500 years. After 500 years, basically everybody on that island is going to look like what you would call, quote unquote, Blasian, right? Like a Hawaiian or a Samoan or that kind of thing. They're going to look like a mixture of, quote unquote, black and quote unquote Asian, because they were basically marrying among themselves and sharing the same genes repeatedly. So they're going to have basically a common look among them because of sharing that genetic gene pool. You understand? So as far as why we have people who, let's say, are very dark skinned, like, certain Africans, then you have people who are like really pale, like certain Europeans. Personally, I think the reason for it is probably like just genetic adaptation. So for example, people who have very dark skin tend to live in very hot areas where there's a lot of sun, okay? And according to, science, which I believe this aspect of science, I don't think is just bogus, like a lot of stuff is. But, having very dark skin helps protect you from the sun, right? And that's why people in very hot countries would tend to have darker skin. Even if you go into the sun right now, if I go into the sun for a while, and I say I start, playing football all the time or playing soccer all the time, my skin's going to get darker, right? As I spend more time in the sun. Is a natural, kind of like a natural sunscreen, basically. Whereas someone who's, let's say, in a certain part of Europe where there's not as much sunlight, they're going to have paler, lighter skin. And, according to science, and I say science, because I am very cautious or skeptical regarding a lot of so-called modern science, right? But certain things to me make sense. A person in Europe or a certain part of Europe that doesn't have a lot of sunlight, right? Their skin is going to be lighter, not only because the sun is not as intense, but also to allow them to absorb more sunlight, okay? Because the dark skin helps to repel some of the sunlight or ultraviolet rays and stuff like that. If you're in a colder place with less sunlight, your skin will have to be lighter in order to allow the sun to penetrate your skin more thoroughly, right? To basically absorb what little sunlight you have. Whereas the person in the hotter place has to deflect a lot of sunlight because they're getting too much sunlight. You understand? So it's really it's a natural skin defense mechanism. So I think that basically regarding why people look so different, a lot of it could really just be environmental adaptation. Even me, for example, when I was living in Barbados, my skin was darker than it is right now. But now that I live in America and I don't go outside as much as I used to, my skin is a lot lighter than it used to be. Well, it's a lot lighter, but it's definitely lighter than it would be in Barbados. You understand? Because I'm not in the sun getting tan all the time and stuff like that. So yeah. And of course, there could also be a case where God himself may have just either designed human genetics in a certain manner or actually purposefully brought about phenotypical diversity at a certain point. For example, and phenotype refers to how you look. Okay. So your physical appearance, that's a phenotype. Genotype is your actual genetics, DNA, that kind of stuff. So God might have purposefully brought about phenotypical diversity at a certain point. As we see with Esau and Jacob, right? Esau was red and hairy all over. Jacob was a smooth man, but they were from the same mother, right? And so God might have actually purposefully at a certain point started to bring about these diverse features in the human family. Or he could have just designed the human genome or human genetics to have this capability of seemingly random diversity just appearing at certain points. That's possible too. You know what I mean? For example, even in my earthly family, right? My earthly parents are both dark-skinned people. If you looked at them, most people would just be okay, they're black. They consider them just be black, like Africans, But my skin is a lot lighter than theirs. And also my hair isn't as rough as many African people's hair is. And if I comb my hair a lot, it can actually look very straight. So growing up, some people would ask me whether I had a quote unquote white parent and stuff like that, and people thought I was, quote unquote mixed. So, but both my parents just look like black Africans to everybody. At least to most people would just consider them to be black Africans, And when I moved to America, in fact, let me get into it now. In Barbados, right? Most people look like what would be considered black African people, black Americans, right? Dark-skinned, coarse hair, African features, that kind of stuff. And so most people in Barbados consider themselves to be black. And I, growing up, consider myself to be black as well. And when I moved to America and I would meet say Dominicans, Puerto Ricans, Africans from actual Africa, a lot of them would tell me that some of them, Africans especially, and a Puerto Rican that I knew, one Puerto Rican asked me what I was and I told her I'm black. And she was like, you sure? And I was like, yeah? She was like, I don't think you black, man. And I was like, I'm black, bro, you know? And even the Africans would tell me like, I'm not black and stuff like that. Although I saw myself as black, you know? So once again, the whole idea of modern so-called race is so artificial. Because one person that you consider to be black, another person will be like, oh, they're not black. And another person's like, oh, they're kind of black. Because it's artificial. You understand? It's artificial. Is literally a societal construct. The whole idea of, oh, the black race, the white race, all this stuff is there's no firm dividing line like that. Okay. We're all just Adam and Eve's grandchildren. And for me, I used to get very offended when people would tell me that I'm not black, right? I was all into the whole like pro-black garbage at one point and stuff like that too. And then when I stopped being a pagan and became a heretic and considered myself to be a Christian and really started to gain the understanding that we're all just Adam and Eve's grandchildren, I was like, well, then I don't even subscribe to modern so-called race anymore. I don't see myself as black. I don't see myself as white. I'm just Adam and Eve's grandson. That's all I am. I'm just Adam and Eve's grandson with brown hair. Not brown hair, black hair, or brown skin or whatever. Like, I don't see myself as black or white or whatever anymore. I really don't. Like, I don't view myself in that manner. I don't subscribe to that lens of viewing humanity. We're all just Adam and Eve's grandchildren. That's all we are. Okay? But like, if I had to choose something, say like, for example, with immigration, you know, that kind of thing, you have to choose, because America is so obsessed with so-called race that they must classify everybody according to that garbage. So you have to choose something when you're like signing up for like a government documents or whatever, all that kind of garbage. And so if I have to choose something, I would put black and white, both of them. I wouldn't just put black, and obviously wouldn't just put white, right? Because I don't see myself as quote unquote black. I don't see myself as quote unquote white. But if I had to choose something on that document, I usually put black and white. If they allow you to put more than one option, I put black and white, because being from Barbados, I have fairly recent ancestors who were quote unquote white Europeans, right? My great grandmother, she honestly, her skin color was not far from Pius XII right here, right? My great grandmother, her skin color was not far off from Pope Pius XII right here. Even her physical features too, as I look at him, right? Like, they could be related, honestly. And her hair was pretty straight, but she wasn't, you know, pure quote unquote white or something. You know, she had her mother was extremely dark skinned, like extremely black, you know, as far as people would describe her. And her father was a, you know, quote unquote light skinned man. So in my recent ancestry, I have both quote unquote black and quote unquote white. So I don't see myself as just one. But anyways, that's what polygynism is. I can't even say the word. That is what polygynism is though, okay? Polygynism is the idea that the human family, the human race has multiple origins, okay? And I personally believe that the modern mentality regarding these like firm dividing lines between black and white and all this garbage is a kind of neo-polygynism. You know, you don't really see this kind of ideology in the ancient world. People were more so divided among like nation, culture, that kind of stuff. You know, Americans versus British people, French versus Italians, Nigerians versus Ghanaians, Ethiopians versus whoever, you know. Of course, though, there were some people who were categorized based on their skin color. Like the word Ethiopian means burnt face, and it was usually used to describe someone who was like dark skinned. Do you understand? But it wasn't like this obsession like we have today. People today are so obsessed with that garbage. They're so obsessed with it, especially like say the radical Democrats. They're so obsessed with that. Oh, straight white male on the stupidness, right? And oh, people of color and all that garbage. I don't care what color somebody is. You know, I don't care. I don't care about that garbage. But the world is so obsessed with that foolishness. And America as a country is obsessed with it too, because they force you to identify yourself as one of those groups and stuff on legal documents. They're too obsessed with that stupidness, man. But anyways, so just to give you a bit of what polygynism is about and my personal views regarding, you know, so-called race in the modern world and that kind of stuff. And even if you look at, I think, the life of St. Anthony, it began by saying that he was of the Egyptian race, right? Egyptian race, based on what? Based on his country, not based on, oh, he has dark skin and a broad nose, and this person has, that whole obsession with people's physical appearance and dividing them into these quote unquote racial groups. I don't subscribe to that garbage. I don't subscribe to that garbage. We're just Adam and Eve's grandchildren, okay? We're just Adam and Eve's grandchildren. That's all we are. Anyways, so let's read what Pius XII said here. Here's an excerpt from Humani Generis. Yes. When, however, there is question of another conjectural opinion, namely Pelagianism, the children of the church by no means enjoy such liberty. For the faithful cannot embrace that opinion which maintains either that after Adam there existed on this earth true men who did not take their origin through natural generation from him, as from the first parent of all, or that Adam represents a certain number of first parents. You see? So you cannot hold that all humanity is not directly descended from Adam, okay? As the first human being, okay? To hold otherwise would be heresy. Let's see now. Let's continue. Yeah, and there are other people. I think even actually the video game Assassin's Creed has that heresy where they basically teach that, according to their, false mythology or whatever, that Adam and Eve were not the only first two humans, that there were like only two of many or something like that. Yeah, that's complete heresy. Okay. Continuing. Now, it is in no way apparent how such an opinion can be reconciled with that which the sources of revealed truth and the documents of the teaching authority of the church propose with regard to original sin, which proceeds from a sin actually committed by an individual Adam, and which through generation is passed on to all, as in everyone, as his own. Okay? But wait, let me see. Hold on. There's actually a part of this that I wanted to include. Did I not include it? Hold on. Yeah. Actually, there's a part I actually want to include. Give me a second. Okay, wait, I actually realized I actually did include what I wanted to include. The part where it says, for the faithful cannot embrace that opinion which maintains either that after Adam there existed on this earth true men who did not take their origin through natural generation from him, as from the first parent of all, and so on. True men. I want to focus on the true men part, okay? So you cannot hold as a Catholic that there are true men who did not descend from Adam, okay? So if you believe that, say, Bigfoot is real and Bigfoot didn't descend from Adam, you cannot hold that Bigfoot is a true man, okay? Now, regarding the exact definition of true men, I'm not aware of a very super precise, super detailed definition of what that means, but just wanted to make you all aware of this right here, okay? You cannot hold that there are any true men who did not descend from Adam, okay? So there you have the Pope's words relevant to this subject. If you believe that there are true men who did not descend naturally from Adam, that is heresy. If, however, you believe there are sentient beings who are not true men and did not descend from Adam, then as far as I know, that would not be forbidden. Okay? Whether St. Anthony and St. Jerome considered the satyr to be a true man descended from Adam or not is not extremely clear, in my opinion. But the fact that it asked for prayers seems to imply that it is a being which needs salvation. And if that is the case, then it would have to be descended from Adam just like we are, right? Because, dogs don't need to pray for salvation, okay? Monkeys don't need to pray for salvation. Only human beings need to pray for salvation on earth, right? So, but they don't, St. Anthony and St. Jerome don't give a lot of details regarding whether they thought the Seder was descended from Adam or not, or stuff like that. Okay. Now back to the planetarians. Regardless of whether Colin believed they were true men descended from Adam or not, etc., I do believe that the modern quote-unquote alien craze is very likely the work of demons attempting to fascinate people with nonsense and in many ways distract them from seeking the Catholic faith. Okay, because a lot of people get so obsessed with like aliens and Bigfoot and all that stupidness, and they devote their entire lives to that garbage, trying to, I need to find the truth about aliens. I need to find the truth about other planets. And then they die in sin and go to hell because they didn't seek the truth instead. The truth of life itself, the truth of God, right? And as I wrote here, there are many people who devote their entire lives to studying UFOs, trying to prove aliens exist, etc. And of course, if they die without the Catholic faith, none of that matters because they go to hell forever. And if these so-called aliens are demons, they'll see the aliens in hell forever, okay? But not looking like that. They'll see a much more terrifying and horrible form of these creatures. So yeah, if you want to see a bit more about my thoughts regarding, so-called aliens and Bigfoot, there are some videos on the channel that I uploaded recently talking about those subjects specifically. And I believe there were clips from the section about the true history of the papacy. Okay. There are many videos online documenting how modern accounts of so-called aliens are very similar, if not identical, to demonic possession and demonic activity. There is also documented evidence that the current climate change obsession was started by a demon who appeared to someone and convinced them that it was their destiny to save the world, etc. Distraction from seeking the Catholic faith and giving people a false sense of purpose, which is not to become saints. Okay? So, because our purpose is to become saints. That is what we're here to do, right? That is what we should be striving for. But these people are given a false sense of purpose of something contrary to that. You understand? And you'll see a lot of infidels. So many infidels often talk about, I'm trying to find my purpose. I'm trying to find my purpose. And of course, if they die in darkness, God leaves them in darkness and they are seeking this purpose without ever realizing that their purpose is to become a saint. That is your purpose. That is what you should be striving for. But these infidels, if they die as infidels, of course, they never find that true purpose. You understand? Also, we talked about this a bit before, but it's here in this section as well. Also, the most common depiction of what so-called aliens look like is oddly similar to how Aleister Crowley, one of, if not the most publicly satanic people in modern history, drew his demonic companion named Lamb. This is further evidence that so-called aliens are nothing more than demons playing tricks on people, abusing them, etc. All the while due to the false guise of being quote-unquote aliens, keeping such people away from seeking the Catholic faith, which teaches that demons are indeed real beings who can deceive people by appearing in a multitude of false forms. There are also many accounts of so-called aliens or abduction experiences ending when the person calls on the name of Jesus. The name of Jesus is powerful. Demons hate God, and even if someone is not Catholic, God can offer them help when they call on his name, which explains the so-called aliens, demons, recoiling at it. Okay? Even when I was a heretic, I had a dream one time where a bunch of demons were attacking me in my dream, right? And I started praying to Jesus to protect me. And I felt basically like I was being protected, and I could feel this kind of like holy energy basically surrounding me. And the demons in my dream, one of them was like, I could tell that somehow they were being tormented or hurt by my prayers and God like doing something to them. And one of the demons was like, okay, all right, if you stop praying, we'll let you wake up. And I said, okay, and I stopped praying, and then I woke up, right? So even a heretic calling on Jesus for help, God, can intervene and help that heretic, So overall, the fact that Antipope Clement XV taught about aliens is likely another strong proof that he was a man deceived by devils to preach a false gospel, heresy, lead people into schism, blasphemy, etc., and ultimately to hell. So, conclusion about the so-called apostles of infinite love. The so-called apostles of infinite love is a heretical, schismatic, blasphemous, and demonic sect founded by a false prophet who received devilish visions from demons and has left a legacy which leads people into eternal damnation to this very day. It is not the Catholic Church.